Views and opinions expressed in this production are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Shooters Nation or our sponsors. Information provided on this show is not a replacement for legal counsel or professional training. Listener and viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows.
Welcome to the Shooters Nation podcast, the talk show for you, the armed citizen. Join us as we discuss guns and gear, training, mindset and knowledge, industry news and buzz, and of course, the firearms culture. Be sure to join us after the show at shootersnation.com and become part of the Shooters Nation.
Hello and welcome to the Shooters Nation podcast. I'm your host, David Yancey, hater of all things pollinated here at the Shooters Nation World Headquarters in beautiful Music City, USA, Nashville, Tennessee, where everything green is trying to bloom and kill me. This is episode 5. Co-hosting with me tonight is the one and only Kydex King in the North, defender of Castle Black, warden of the Northern Wall, and owner of Squared Away Customs, Mark Lancaster.
Good evening, fellas.
That was a lot of Game of Thrones in there for some reason, Mark. I have no idea what just happened.
Awesome.
How are things in New Hampshire?
Muddy. The snow's dissipating. There's still some banks here, but the driveways are muddy. The roads are muddy. Everything's muddy. Got a new truck last week. It's muddy. The seats are muddy because I have dogs. So it's everything's muddy. That's the end of my day.
We're going to have to work a lot of mud into the intro next time. So that's my challenge.
That's bad. Other than that, things are awesome. Thank you.
Great. Glad to hear it. So also joining us tonight is our special guest, Jason Demo. Jason is a veteran law enforcement officer who served as a deputy sheriff in Central Florida for nearly a decade. Jason is now the owner and principal behind Jason Demo Photography and Media Consulting, where he focuses on guns, gear, and tactics as a professional consultant and content creator for the tactical industry. So, Jason, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me on. Although I'm a little jealous of Mark's intro. It sounded way cooler.
We're going to get into the cool stuff about you. Trust me. And, I know that as we spoke just last week or the week before to get to know you a little bit, Jason, what you told me about you is definitely not lacking in the cool factor. So if you're cool with that, I think we can just go right into the segue on who you are. And let's talk about your background for a moment, if we could. Your career as a law enforcement officer wasn't just writing speeding tickets or busting people for jaywalking. Am I correct?
No, that is correct. I actually never wrote a single speeding ticket in my entire career, actually. So
okay.
that is accurate.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you did?
Sure. So yeah, like you said, started out in patrol like everybody else does, did the field training officer gig for a little bit, then eventually shifted over to our street crimes unit, where I was in the tactical anti-crime unit for several years, which is pretty much just the unit was focused on guns and dope and stuff like that, just trying to get bad people off the street. And then after that, for the last probably about 3.5 years of my career, I was in our violent fugitive unit, just going after bad dudes all the time. So that was probably the highlight of my career. I had a lot of good training, a lot of good experience, and it was very rewarding doing that. Got to do a lot of fun stuff. So that was definitely enjoyable.
That sounds a little bit more fascinating than the Kydex King of the North. I'm sorry, Mark.
Well, I did.
I have mud.
You have mud. Yeah, that's true.
I did carry the Kydex King of the North's first generation kilo on duty. So
you're an OG Kydex customer from Squared Away Customs.
I am. I was one of the first customers, right, Mark?
You sure was. Yeah. Before I had a website, when I was taking my orders through Facebook messaging, I don't even remember. I think he probably had to mail me a check. He was like probably the first week before I even had my LLC legal. I think Jason was a customer, and we have a mutual friend that got us in cahoots, and we've been making them gear ever since.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I haven't bought any other holster since then. I've been using Squared Away Customs for all those years now. Yeah, so I definitely enjoy the gear.
That is so convenient. That works really well for the episode tonight, Mark.
Yeah.
Me. All right. That was completely unplanned and unrehearsed. So, Jason, the listeners may be kind of wondering what we've got you on the show for tonight. So, I think that really the basis of our episode tonight is that you're going to share some of the experience that you had and what you learned along the way in the relatively dangerous and high risk career of fugitive apprehension with our listeners, right?
Correct. Yeah. One thing when you start, and hopefully this isn't too much of a segue, but start getting into instructors, and I'm not an instructor, but whether they're military or law enforcement, I think what makes a good instructor or a good teacher is someone that can take their experience and relate it to other people that may not have that experience. So, whether you're in the military or law enforcement, you may have a lot of good experience, but it might not all of it be applicable, in a civilian background. So Hopefully I can, stay on the tracks and kind of help maybe give some of the listeners some things to chew on from a law enforcement perspective, but relate it to, civilian type stuff.
Perfect. Well, I think really what I'd like to talk to you about tonight, and I'll just kind of serve as the official question asker for our listeners, is how can an armed citizen potentially avoid having to use their handgun entirely? And that may seem like a strange topic for a firearms-related podcast, but we've talked about this in the past, that not every problem is a gun problem, and conversely, any situation that you introduce yourself into with a gun becomes a gun situation by proxy, it seems like. So if we can maybe frame our conversation around that just to get started, we can roll into some questions for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of touch on that, your gun is a hammer and not every problem is a nail. And, if we carry a gun, we all like to be, the hero in our own fantasies and think about, how things are going to go down and how we're going to stop the bank robbery, when Val Kilmer comes in and Heat, and we're going to be, these movie star heroes or whatever. But, the reality is we're probably not going to have to use our handgun, statistically speaking. And, you can win every single fight that you're not part of. So if you can avoid conflict, de-escalate, things like that, that's a win in my book. I don't want to have to use my gun. I don't ever want to have to use my gun. So if I can avoid that situation in the first place, that's a win for me.
Well, it seems to me that if you come to the point in a confrontation that your handgun has come out of its holster and you're preparing to use it, a lot of other opportunities may have been missed along the way where you could have backed away from that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Not always the case, but certainly I think a lot of people who have been in bad situations can look back and Monday morning quarterback themselves and say, I probably could have avoided that had I, made some better decisions. Okay.
Right. And I guess those decisions really could even be watching your surroundings and choosing not to be in a place or a situation that might have required that escalation of force, if you will.
For sure.
Okay, great. Well, so according to your biography, you conducted over 200 fugitive investigations and apprehensions as a member of the Tactical Surveillance Squad. Could you tell us just a little bit about what a Tactical Surveillance Squad is? And then I've got another question for you after that.
Sure. So I worked for a pretty large agency, and we had several different fugitive units within that agency. A lot of smaller agencies either won't have a fugitive unit or they'll only have, one. But each of the several fugitive units we had kind of had their own specialty. And one of our specialties was extended surveillance. So if the detectives needed more information on a target or additional charges or electronic surveillance or video surveillance or whatever, we would kind of come in and do that. But we were also the apprehension team. So we would kind of have to switch from an undercover surveillance mode immediately into a takedown or apprehension mode. But yeah, we only worked violent fugitive cases. So, armed robbery, carjacking, murder, sexual assault, shooting, stabbings, things like that. So we weren't, going after people that skipped out on their bail bond or didn't pay a traffic ticket. It was all violent crime stuff. So that's kind of just the basic gist of what we did.
I would say that in the course of doing that literally guaranteed interaction with violent criminals, the worst of the worst, the people that would absolutely hurt you if given the opportunity to do so.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. And so as I think through that, and guiding our listeners through this, that sounds to me like a good laboratory for learning what works and what doesn't when you're dealing with those kinds of situations.
Yeah, for sure. When you're dealing with evil people like that on a regular basis, you get a not even a glimpse, you get almost a deep look into people's lives and their mindset and how they think and how they react, and people that just don't care about anything else but themselves. They're violent criminals for a reason. If you're committing violence against someone else, there's not really any more selfish act that you can do. And just seeing people not care about their family, their friends, people's lives, anything, and just how desperate they would get. It's definitely, fascinating, not in a, I don't want that to sound, like cruel or weird or anything, but it's fascinating to see how violent criminals and fugitives that know, hey, when I get caught, this is the end. I'm going away for a long time. Just seeing the lengths they will go to just to avoid that.
Mark, what was it that Ian Strembeck referred to that the interaction with criminals? The normalcy of criminal interaction. It has a certain systemic pattern and predictability, I guess, as you're dealing with those people. That there's certain undertones and undercurrents that are characteristic of dealing with criminals, from person to person, the same way that there are just in dealing with normal people. So 200 fugitive investigations and apprehensions. It's definitely a focused interaction with these people that might result in a violent encounter. How many of these apprehensions involved you or your team going in with guns drawn?
I'm sorry, going in with what? You cut out there.
Going in with guns drawn.
Oh, that's 100%. I mean, with all of our takedowns really happen pretty much one of three ways. It was either some type of structure entry, so you're banging down a door and going in, or a dynamic vehicle takedown. There's a lot of different vehicle tactics that go into that. Or just literally a jump out. You roll up in a van and 5 dudes jump out and dogpile on a guy on the side of the road or whatever. But it's always guns out. Yeah, there's no, hey sir, will you please put your hands behind your back? A lot of these individuals are armed, and like I said earlier, they know what they've done and they know they're going away for a long time. So
yeah, okay.
Every encounter was an armed encounter for sure.
So, and I'll go ahead and confess that I've gamed this question a little bit. I'm leading to a point from our previous conversation, but how many times as a law enforcement officer on these high risk arrests did you actually have to shoot somebody?
No, that's a good question. That's usually people's first question when they find out you're a cop. But at least you have a good reason behind asking me. But no, that's something that I'm extremely proud of, though. In the 3.5 years we were doing this and over 200 violent fugitive arrests, nobody on my squad discharged their firearm once. So to me, that is, there's a handful of things that I'm most proud of in my law enforcement career, and that is it. Everybody thinks, cops are going in just smoking everybody left and right. And no, we were going after the worst of the worst. And, first by the grace of God, but secondly, I'd like to think with, just some of our tactics and techniques and the things we were doing, we were able to avoid conflict a lot of times and safely apprehend the target. Okay.
Well, so
probably says a lot. Being in that that career field and doing that kind of work. I mean, it probably says a lot for the demeanor of your team as well and the mindset of your team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to go into that very arrogant and trigger happy. And I think we hear about that. And, I think we all know that kind of cop on TV anyway. And
Right.
To know that you handled that much and that never happened is impressive, if you ask me.
Yeah. And to brag on that team, I mean, that team was in place long before I got on the team, and they've still been doing work in the 3 years that I've been out of law enforcement. And I want to say at least a decade they've been doing it, and they've never shot anybody. I mean, 10 years of going after that level of criminal and not getting in a shooting is very impressive, in my opinion.
No, that is the consummate professionals, and unfortunately, the media just doesn't. That story doesn't sell on the news, and so a lot of respect for the officers that do that day in and day out, and still manage to do it in a way that everybody goes home and nobody gets hurt, including the person that they're apprehending. So that's phenomenal. So I confess that I was building up to a point with all of that, and really I just wanted to kind of lay the groundwork for why you are the subject matter expert tonight for this conversation, and that is 200 fugitive arrests, high risk apprehensions, 0 people shot in the process of that. I believe that builds a qualification for you to talk about how every problem is not necessarily one that requires the trigger to be pulled or even to go to guns, quote unquote. So I guess based on what I'm hearing, then there's a certain responsibility demanded of any of us who go armed to be actively thinking and making decisions about which tool we're going to use and when we're going to use it, all the way up to the moment that your finger begins to pull that trigger.
Absolutely.
So can you elaborate a little bit on that for us, and how does that relate to the civilian?
Sure. So, and kind of like I said earlier, and your gun is a tool, it's a hammer, and it is for nail problems. It is to hit nails, and people like to say, oh, my shotgun's an attitude adjuster or whatever. Like, yeah, you pull out a long gun, that's definitely an attitude adjuster or whatever. But, there's so many different things that you can do as a civilian to not even have to consider pulling your gun. Just a few examples would be, not going to certain places, like you said, avoiding certain places, whether it's, shady areas of town or different establishments or whatever that there's going to be problems. Verbal judo is great, or just, verbally being able to de-escalate a situation, not talking or instigating with people when you have the chance to do that. I think we're going to talk about road rage here in a minute, but your horn, most people don't realize this, your horn on your vehicle is specifically designed for emergencies. Mm-hmm. And I know that's not why most of us use it, myself included. Sometimes, I'm guilty of it too, but your horn is supposed to be in a emergency notification device, for lack of better words. When you honk at somebody, you have no idea who you're honking at. When you lay on the horn or, cuss somebody out or tell them number one or all those things that, all of us have done that, we're not proud of or whatever, you have no idea who you're dealing with. So just, taking a step back, and it's hard, especially, us as men, we're alpha males and testosterone. We want to, puff out our chest and we want to be the top dog or whatever.
Right.
But, taking the time to be like, should I be here in the first place? And if I am here, what can I do to avoid conflict, de-escalate, get out of situations long before even needing to consider to pull a firearm? Because your firearm, let's face it, it's a last resort. It should not be your primary option. If somebody honks at me in traffic, I'm not drawing my gun. If somebody bows up in public when I'm in Walmart with my wife and daughter, I'm not pulling my gun. It is a last resort.
Right. Yeah, I think that's key, and it goes a long way to describing part of the the issue that I have currently with the media climate about gun owners. And, the media would really like to paint a picture of the armed civilian as being somebody who's walking around, like Wyatt Earp with their handgun on their hip, and they're just looking for an opportunity to use that. And my experience has been, thankfully, mostly positive. I've not encountered that sort of thing. And, I hope that I never am guilty of that sort of behavior, right? But you're exactly right. There are many situations, it seems, in our daily life that the wrong kind of concealed carrier or the wrong kind of civilian carrier might misuse that tool and skip immediately from 0 to 60 miles an hour, and the next thing you know, they're full into it with a handgun, and that's just definitely the kind of thing that we want to dissuade our listeners from ever considering, and we want to help people temper their their expectations of themselves as an armed civilian. So,
and it's not, I don't think it's just the media getting a bad they're picking that up, and it's not just from their slanted view, but like when there's an anti-gun rally and you have a bunch of guys standing there with AR-15s on their shoulders, it's not helping our cause. That's hurting us. It's making it. That's playing right into the hand that they're dealing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And it's not doing us any good whatsoever. And it's like, yeah, you're standing there for your rights, but at the same time, you're making us all look like crazy gun people. And that's, it's a very small portion of who we are.
Yeah, we can easily be our own worst enemies as gun owners. When we do things like that. I think that's a good conversation for a future podcast episode. And I'm not trying to sideline that conversation tonight. If our conversation goes there, it goes there. We're going to go into it. But I really would like to dig into that with a couple of you folks, and talk about how not only do we eat our own in some cases, but we are our own worst enemy, especially when it comes to publicity. So, yeah. All right. Well, so Jason, you mentioned road rage. I'm not asking you to confess anything here tonight that you hadn't planned on confessing, but I can make it safe for you. We had a conversation on a previous episode where I mentioned that my grandfather, former law enforcement officer himself, had kind of cautioned me when he found out that I had got my concealed carry permit. He said, son, if you're going to carry a gun and you're going to put that gun in your holster, leave your middle finger at home. And, that's been, I thought, well, okay, that's a cute saying, but it dawned on me later in life, really what he was saying, which was you've got a means to really escalate a problem into territory that it might otherwise not have needed to go. When you carry that gun, so you should accommodate, or compensate in other areas. And for me, he was saying, dial back your temper. And so, Nashville, Tennessee traffic is probably among the worst. My emergency horn signaling device has sometimes gotten a workout. I'm not proud to say that, but I'm guilty of that at times. And so I think that what you just said is a wake up call for me, even to think about what I'm doing and what I've got in my vehicle. So I'm going to ask you maybe a funny twist on that. As a law enforcement officer, and it sounds like you did some undercover work, were you ever the recipient of road rage while you were armed?
Yeah.
Hey, folks. All right, so we're back. We had a little bit of audio difficulty, and we're back again with Jason Demo. Jason, thanks for connecting back in with us. I apologize for the connectivity issues there, but really appreciate your persistence sticking with us.
Yeah, no problem. I think it was on my end, so sorry about that.
Not a problem at all. So right before we dropped, we were talking about road rage, and specifically, I think maybe there's a bit of a humorous twist there, at least in my mind. So, thinking about all the times that I've been in traffic and I've been guilty of laying on the horn when somebody, cut me off or whatever. I kind of wonder now how many of those people might have been law enforcement officers and I didn't realize it. So has that ever happened to you while you're on duty in an undercover capacity, driving around in a vehicle that was definitely not a police car?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's funny because if you talk to any cop, they'll let you know, when you drive a marked patrol vehicle, everybody obeys all the laws. They go 10, 15, 20 miles an hour under the speed limit, hands at 10 and 2 o'clock. Everybody is like overly paranoid. But as soon as you go to a unit where you get either an undercover or an unmarked vehicle, it's like Pandora's box, boom, opens up. And then now everybody's road raging and speeding and smoking dope next to you and drinking, beer and stuff. It's funny. But as funny as that is, the reason I bring that up is you never know who is in a car, period.
Right.
No matter who it is, you have no idea. And so, occasionally, people would, road rage against me or whatever. And for the most part, we couldn't pull people over or whatever because of our different missions that we were on or whatnot. But sometimes, if it was bad enough, I'd pull somebody over, and just walk up to the car, and here comes this guy, in all his cat gear out of soccer mom minivan. They had no idea it was a cop. And I'd walk up and be like, okay, if you sufficiently learned your lesson, yes, sir. I'm sorry. Okay, cool. Have a nice day. And that was usually enough. I wasn't, a jerk, and I wouldn't write people tickets or whatever, but,
right.
The other thing to that, is I had a plethora of firearms in my car, a sub gun, AR-15, short barrel shotgun, all kinds of handguns, shield, body armor, all kinds of gear. And obviously, I would never use that, because I'm pissed off at somebody in a road rage incident or whatever. But it just illustrates the point that, these people would cut me off or honk at me or, try to run me off the road or whatever. And they have no clue that, I've got a small arsenal in my vehicle. And that goes for all of us on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
When we're driving around on the road, you have no idea who you're dealing with or what they may or may not have in their vehicle.
The small arsenal sounds like Mark on his way to the grocery store, probably. He's not going to admit to that. So, it's interesting that you two things, right? First, I've got to ask, when you're in a marked car and everybody is suddenly the most law-abiding citizen on the road and they're driving 5 miles under and it's a rolling roadblock of civilians in front of you and you're just trying to get home, how annoying is that?
Oh, it's the worst. Any cop will tell you that. It's like, please, people, it's okay. You can go like 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. I just want to get from point A to point B.
Right. Okay. And so, I think it's not too big of a jump to say that, so you're the armed law enforcement officer with the small arsenal in the car. Most people would say, okay, that's fine. We expect that. And that's legitimately acceptable that you would. You're a cop. But, there's got to be every day in and out as we drive down the road, people who are the exact opposite of that and who are the most law unabiding criminal, vicious animal types that are driving around with their small arsenal as well. And they may not always look like what you think they're going to look like. And as I think about that, how many vehicles have I honked at that I probably wouldn't have had I known what was riding shotgun with that person? So
absolutely. And the thing too is, your vehicle is a weapon. They don't have to have a small arsenal of weapons in their car. You can run somebody off the road very easily with your own vehicle, and it happens all the time. So, right. You just never know. And in every road rage incident is technically an armed encounter, whether you want to think about that or not. Your vehicle, their vehicle is a weapon. Right.
Is that the way that law enforcement kind of looks at that? Is, when you get into a road rage contest with another motorist, that you're driving 3,000 pound weapons that is it kind of looked at a little bit differently than a pushing match in the Walmart parking lot?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay,
for sure.
Okay, very good. So maybe building off of that into another question. If I had to learn a lesson from what you just said, it would be just simply letting it go. And so, that would, let's take the car out of the situation. Out in public, minding your own business. Maybe you're standing, in line at the movies or something, and a guy cuts you, in line, and you've got an option. You say something, or you don't. And let's just say that as Joe Citizen, I'm standing there and I've got my Glock inside the waistband. It's concealed. Guy cuts me in line and I decide to get mouthy about that. Seems like maybe not the right choice of reactions. Have you had any experience along those lines or anything that you could share?
Yeah, and I'll touch on that because that's a good example. Most of us, especially as men, or, if you're, raised by decent parents or whatever, if somebody does that, when you're in the movie theater or whatever, most of us would just say something like, hey man, that all of us have been waiting, get in the back of the line. You don't even have to say that in a antagonistic or rude or cocky way or whatever. Just that alone, you are now instigating a situation. And I'm not saying that, you never stand up for yourself or you act like a coward or, you run away any chance you have or whatever. But even that, is it worth it? Is it really worth it? Like, even if you miss your entire movie altogether because that guy got the last movie ticket, like, is it really worth, especially, if you're with your family, you got your wife, your children, is it really, really, really worth it? And that's the thing that, we all need to do a better job of, because I think we can all admit that we've instigated different situations that we really probably shouldn't have, even not meaning to instigate it into, a elevated altercation. As
a armed citizen, how much further should we dial back our responses? Is something extra expected of us from law enforcement that, hey, I'm, maybe role play here. I'm the officer. I come on the scene and there's been a pushing match at the movie theater because of this. And it escalated. It never came to blows. Guns never were drawn, but still a disturbance was reported to the police, and I'm there to investigate. And I find out that you've got a concealed handgun on you as a permit holder. How do law enforcement generally look at that?
It's hard to give you a complete answer on that because that's on a case by case basis. But you better believe if you get into some type of altercation with somebody, you better believe that it's going to come up that you were armed, if the police are called. And you never know what, people will say, and, turns into a he said, she said thing. You can definitely get jammed up. And then the other thing to remember is a pushing altercation, a shoving match is not a deadly force encounter, but I don't want to get into just a shoving match with a gun on me. I don't want to get into an entangled gunfight unintentionally, or my gun get ripped from my holster, or, fall out of your holster if you're not, using a good piece of gear or whatever, and if you instigate that and elevate that, the other thing is you can instigate a situation. Sorry, it's a little bit of a rabbit trail and I'm kind of ADD if you haven't figured that out yet, but you can instigate a situation and justifiably use deadly force. So you can be cleared, like you legitimately used self-defense in fear of your life or someone else's life, but you've got to live with the fact that, hey, you know what? I could have avoided this altogether. And we could probably dedicate an entire podcast episode to, the George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin case, which happened, very close to me. And I followed that case intimately because it was literally within an hour of where I lived. And I firmly believe that George Zimmerman used self-defense in that situation, but I also firmly believe that he instigated and caused that situation, and it could have been avoided. And Trayvon Martin could still be here today, despite what we think about both of those individuals and as human beings or whatever. And I'm not, trying to promote or, denigrate either of those people. But all I'm saying simply is I think that was a legitimate use of force. However, it could have been avoided.
Right. So as I think about just that, if I instigate a situation that then escalates, and then I'm, in the eyes of the law, justified in using deadly force against an individual who responds to my instigation, I have, regardless of what the law says, I have provoked, I have drawn that person in, and then I have potentially taken their life, and they had no other option except for they could have walked away from it, right? And so I think that's a lesson twofold, two sides of that lesson. We, as a armed citizen, we have the choice to not escalate and just know that we carry on us the means to end someone's life and approach that with a significant amount of responsibility and reluctance to use it. And then also as a respondent to a pushing match or what have you, we have the option to try to walk away and remove ourselves, because kind of back to the minivan scenario, you don't know what that other person's carrying all the time. And so just because they provoke it doesn't mean you have to react to it necessarily, right? So you can let it go on either side of that. I don't know, Mark, what are you thinking? You look like you're kind of deep in thought there.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think it kind of goes back to I think we mentioned in a previous episode, like if you're carrying a gun and you get into the fight, you're still in a gunfight, even if you haven't drawn the gun, right? Yeah. It's just not a shooting. If you know what I mean? Like it's still a gunfight. So you're still, it could come loose. So I think, Jason, you mentioned it could come loose. It could fall out. It could end up in the other guy's hands. It could end up in a bystander's hands. It could end up in his buddy's hands. Like, I think, and I catch myself on a regular basis. Like in the road rage thing it frustrates me when people drive like idiots. And I think it does for a lot of people. And I'll catch myself just like, but I've got the wife and kids on board, and I just can't. Yeah. And I think about it as just like, well, also a concealed carry guy, I really shouldn't be doing this whether they're with me or not, because I instantly go to my thought process instantly goes to like, well, if they weren't with me, and I'm just like, no, I wouldn't, because that's not smart either.
Right. Yeah. That you hit a point that I wanted to ask Jason about. You referenced the term gunfight. And so I think that most of the time our listeners, when they hear gunfight, they immediately assume triggers are being pulled, lead's flying. But you and I have talked about this before privately, and you said there's a clear distinction between a gunfight and a firefight. Do you want to maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard multiple people say this before, so I haven't by no means coined this. And I don't remember where I first heard it, or I would absolutely give credit. But, there is a big difference between a gunfight and a firefight. A firefight is when you are exchanging rounds with a bad guy or multiple attackers or what have you. And if you go to the mall and you get out of your car and you're walking up and somebody's like, hey, they pull a knife on you and say, hey, give me your wallet. And you pull a gun out and you point at them and say, hey, back away, get on the ground, whatever. They drop the knife and they take off. That's a gunfight. You just brought a gun to a fight and you successfully won that gunfight. It's not a firefight because you didn't get in an actual defensive encounter, where rounds were exchanged or whatever. But you have to understand as an armed citizen, and, cops talk about this all the time. We're told, in the academy from day one, hey, look, every encounter is an armed encounter because you've got all kinds of weapons on your bat belt. Every single encounter you get in has a gun in it. And there are a lot of cops out there who have encountered bad guys without any weapons and have been shot and killed by their own guns. It's a sober reality that you have to remember. You are making that conscious decision to carry that gun with you. You are getting into a gunfight if you get into an altercation with someone, whether you intend to have that gun be in the fight or not. It is in the fight. And, David, you were talking earlier about being a responder. If you're let's go back to the movie theater and two teenagers start fighting, okay. A lot of us would have the urge like, oh, let me jump in there, get in between them and say, break it up, break it up, break it up. Well, you're now jumping in between two people that are wailing on each other, not thinking straight. And you're introducing a gun into that fight. And your intentions are pure. They're good intentions. You have good motive. You're not trying to pick a fight. You're not trying to be, a bad guy or anything. You're legitimately like, oh, look at these, two high schoolers or whatever wailing on each other. Well, you now introduced a gun into that fight and, unintentionally possibly, instigated that or elevated it even more. So, it's every fight is a gunfight if you have a gun on you, and you have to remember that.
Yeah, as you were talking, I started to think about the term gray man, and it's one of those, spiffy little tactical terms that gets thrown around in our circle. It seems like you see it on the internet a lot, and instructors use that term. But gray man, be the man that's gray. He blends into the noise, into the scenery, goes unnoticed, and that should be kind of our goal, theoretically, and I think practically, as an armed civilian, is just not stick out, not be the target, not be the focus point of somebody's aggression and their attention. But really, you just kind of brought to light the fact that being the gray man also means picking and choosing what you get involved in. Just because you have that firearm on your person, that should be a defensive tool of last resort. That is not something that should embolden you to go insert yourself into a situation that others could handle or, wouldn't have escalated to the point that it did had you stayed out of it, right? So, it's just, again, I'm kind of going back to the first thoughts of the episode of how to avoid using your firearm as an armed citizen and what other tools are at your disposal before you get to that point. So maybe we can go into that. You mentioned a term that was fascinating to me, verbal judo. I think I know what that means, but could you kind of talk us through that?
Yeah. So, I'll start off. I'm 5'10", $165, 170 pounds. The heaviest I was in law enforcement was like 185 pounds. So I was not a big guy. My mouth was my most powerful weapon in law enforcement. When I was in patrol and on a traffic stop by myself before backup arrived or whatever, talking myself out of a butt kicking, or just talking people into handcuffs. I talked a lot of people that could have crushed me into handcuffs just by, reverse psychology, or just being polite to people, or just, laying out the facts for them and being like, listen, man, you absolutely can kick my butt. I have no problems admitting that, but I'm going to get on this radio and 20 of my buddies are going to show up and they're going to kick your butt. So if you want to win that fight with me and start this, that's fine. But just so you know, I'm going to hit this emergency button and everybody and their mother's going to come and they're going to wail on you and the dog's going to bite you and it's not going to be fun. I've literally said that to people and have them turn around, put their hands behind their back, it's just, our mouth is a powerful, powerful weapon. And I think we can all think back in our lives how many times we've said things that we shouldn't have said, just on a micro level, within, our families. If you're married, I think we can all admit that we've said things we shouldn't have said to our spouse.
I'm not going to admit that on recording.
She listens, doesn't she, David?
She listens.
Well, my wife is sleeping in the other room, so I can get away with saying it now, and I don't know that she'll hear it. But no, I mean, we've all said things we shouldn't have, and just like we can talk ourselves into a bad situation, like we've been discussing, we can talk ourselves out of a bad situation. And just verbal judo is just simply that, using your words as a weapon, using them as a defensive tactic, using them as a strategy to keep yourself out of trouble, or if you are in trouble, talking your way out of a situation.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what I'd like to do. I'd like to take a break and pay the bills, so to speak, and we're going to throw Mark a little bit of business. But we'll come back, and I'd really like to focus the next bit of our show on verbal judo and any other tools that you can think of to share with our audience as armed civilians and what they can use to de-escalate and to avoid that final line that gets crossed when a person decides it's time for a gun. And so if you can stick around with us for a bit longer, we'll get into that right after the break.
Sounds good.
Fantastic. All right. We will be right back. Hey folks, David here. I want you to think about the handgun you carry for your own protection, and I really want you to think about the holster you carry it in. Do you have trouble concealing your handgun? Does it feel like no matter what you do or how you dress, it's painfully obvious to everyone that you're carrying concealed? Well, I want to take a moment to introduce you to Squared Away Customs. Squared Away Customs is a manufacturer of custom, high-quality holsters for both concealed carry and duty carry. They provide a catalog of holster designs to choose from, and they are glad to take on custom work to design something to meet your specific needs. Mark and his team take pride in providing an excellent product at a reasonable cost. They work hard to keep delivery times short, and their number one goal is to ensure that their customers are satisfied. Squared Away Customs also offers a heroes discount to military, police, emergency medical workers, and educators. And for listeners of the Shooters Nation podcast, Mark offers a reduced pricing if you use coupon code ShootersNation. Again, that's ShootersNation as the coupon code. So, before you strap that cheap floppy store-bought holster on again, head over to squaredawaycustoms.com and treat yourself and your carry gun to something more worthy of the challenge. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. This is David and Mark Lancaster here with Jason Demo. And Jason, so as we were talking before the break, we were going to start discussing verbal judo, and maybe if I can just kind of recalibrate that just a hair for us. Also want to talk about, just any tool that a civilian should have in their mental toolkit, if you will, to de-escalate a situation, and maybe even we can get into some just flat avoidance. How do you see a problem before you ever get to it or before it ever gets to you? So, starting off, I guess, with just the concept of verbal judo and that talking your way out of a bad situation. Is there anything you can share from us personally as a civilian, or even from your time in law enforcement, that maybe goes into that a little bit?
Yeah, I've got a personal story I'll share just in a second, but touching on verbal judo, one of the important things to remember about something like verbal judo is it's only necessary if you're already in a conflict with someone. It doesn't have to be a physical conflict, but if you're already in some type of altercation with someone, the number one thing you can do is avoid. And there's lots of ways to do that. Like we talked about earlier, avoid certain areas. You see somebody who's acting a certain way. Okay, I'm not going to go instigate with them. I'm not going to start a conflict with them.
Okay.
You see a group of people that look shady or whatever. Okay, let's go to the other side of the street. Or we'll come back for a milkshake later, wherever you are. Avoiding the conflict is the best thing you can do. Verbal judo is for when you're already in that conflict. And so somebody has instigated, or you made a poor decision and you started something, you instigated something. So now how can I, use the martial arts of the mind, so to speak, to better get out of a situation, to actually, talk my way out of any further escalation. I don't know if you want to touch on that, or I could go into my personal story kind of.
No, yeah. I mean, let's definitely get into the personal story, because I think that would probably have some value for everybody. But, let me ask a question. So we've got three men here on the podcast tonight. We're sharing some time across the internet. I'm going to say that it's a little hard sometimes to listen to that little voice inside that says, hey, buddy, you probably shouldn't go there because those people look like they're up to no good. I want to, kind of bow up a little bit and be the man and say, well, I can take care of whatever, whatever happens. I'm not going to wimp out and take my family somewhere else right now. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go have that milkshake. Seems like a bad choice to me. So, is there anything in particular that you can say that, when you start picking up on these cues subconsciously, you probably ought to pay attention to them because your subconscious is warning you about something bad that's imminent or possible?
Yeah, for sure. the first step in this is the hardest, and it's just thinking before you speak or thinking before you act. And we all struggle with that. We all say things without thinking. We all act without thinking. And just trying to, train your mind to really, ask yourself, should I be saying this? Should I be doing this? Should I be going to this place? It's much easier for me to sit here calm in my office talking to you guys, and promote doing this. But, when somebody cuts me off, tomorrow on the way, to the store with my wife, it's going to be much harder for me to exhibit self-control. But, we don't like to get into this because it's not as sexy as talking about guns and EDC and training and shooting and all that stuff. But, just exhibiting and practicing self-control, that is a key component, particularly if, obviously just in life, period. But if you're going to be walking around, with a gun all the time, you need to have some serious self-control.
Right. As a law enforcement officer on patrol, I'm sure that you guys learn to see things a little bit differently. And, where I might drive by the Quickie Mart and just see a couple guys hanging around outside, talking and having a good time cutting up with each other, you might drive by and see something different that tells you there's a problem brewing here. So what is it that as a civilian I'm missing out on? What cues am I not seeing that maybe would help me avoid going into a situation that might expose me and my family to risk?
That's a good question. So, one thing in law enforcement, and I still do it to this day because it's just part of my DNA, like your job in law enforcement is to be inserted into conflict. Nobody calls the cops because they're having a birthday party, or they, are having a good day. Your job is either to respond to conflict or you are supposed to go seek it out, through self-initiated proactive activity. So if you're a cop that's, worth your salt, you're looking for, okay, who's up to no good? Who looks like they're carrying a gun? Who looks like, they're slinging dope on the side of the road? Who looks like, they're up to no good in their car? We all know this, because, we carry a gun and nobody ever notices, it printing if we have a gun that's printing or whatever. But people are oblivious. Your average citizen is oblivious. What do you see when you're in the parking lot going into the store every day? You see everybody, they're looking down, they're on their cell phone, completely oblivious, no situational awareness, no clue what's going on. As an average citizen who's not used to seeking out that conflict and being aware of it, the number one thing you can do is just, get your nose out of your phone, get your nose out of, your purse or whatever. Stop worrying about the next thing that you've got to do and just look around. Just be aware of your surroundings. You don't have to be a cop to look at somebody and be like, they kind of look like they're up to no good or they look kind of shady. And I'm not saying, judging people or being, prejudicial or anything, but hey, like the most important thing to me in life is my wife and daughter. So if I accidentally judge somebody and go to the other side of the road, and really, they're a nice person, like, I'm not doing anything to hurt that person. I'm just trying to take care of my family. So, as far as like actual things to look for, that's almost harder to touch on just because there's so many things you can see. But, the basic thing is just use your instinct, use your gut. You've got a gut feeling for a reason. We've all had the hair stand up on the back of our neck and be like, you know what, something's not right, or we've all had that feeling like I'm being watched right now. Somebody's watching me. You can hone those techniques and practices by just paying attention, by just limiting your distractions. Same thing goes in the car. We're talking about road rage and stuff. What do we all do at a red light? A lot of us get on our phone,
right?
Checking social media, texting somebody or whatever. Like, are you really aware of your surroundings in your vehicle too? Especially those of us that have tinted windows, we feel like we're in this bubble that like nobody sees us. Well, no, everybody still sees you and you're not really in this safe haven. So just, I know I've said it several times, but just trying to be aware of your surroundings and observe the people around you.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Something that's, I think, kind of a shame, and it's kind of goes into it's something that I feel like the verbal judo should be taught as much, if not more, than actual firearms classes. You know what I mean? And it's like medical, but it's not anything people are going to pay for because you don't get the cool guy thing out of it. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And it's frustrating to me because you see the value in it. The more podcasts I listen to in this arena, and the more people I talk to, and the friends in the industry and other trainers and classes I've taken, it's like the verbal stuff leading up to the event is important as you getting your gun out of the holster and getting it on target. But yet nobody trains that, or very few people train that. And if it was just an 8-hour class of that, nobody would pay to take it.
Well, yeah,
it's like the medical, and like I said, it's just like the medical too, and it's unfortunate because I think they're way more important because you can use them more often.
Right. Well, I can imagine if I went back to work on Monday and said, "Yeah, man, I took this really great class this past weekend, for self-defense," and immediately everybody around me, all the guys, their ears perk up and they're tuned in. They're okay, yeah, what was it, right? And it's like, yeah, we spent 12 hours between Saturday and Sunday talking about de-escalation and how to not get into fights. And they would probably just look at me and roll their eyes, But now if I tell them that I spent 12 hours, we were blasting holes in targets, that's cool, man. Everybody wants to know about that. So, let's be real though. In reality, in real life, the thing that's going to keep you out of the news and keep you out of the jail and get you back to your family and back to your coworkers on Monday to tell a thrilling story is not blasting holes in the other person. It's going to be the thing that you're talking about de-escalation and avoidance and paying attention to your spidey sense, if you will, that little voice in your gut feeling that says, hey, this is a bad situation. That, those guys hanging out outside that Quickie Mart, they're the lookouts, because there's a guy, if you look past them inside the store, there's a guy with a gun holding up the clerk. And if you had just walked into that thing oblivious, with your head in your cell phone, guess what? Now you're in the middle of an armed robbery. So, yeah, there's a lot to be said about the non-sexy art of de-escalation and avoidance. And I think that's the thing that I really was excited to talk to you about tonight. So you hinted at the fact that there was a personal story that you had about de-escalation and talking your way out of a situation. So I'm going to ask to put you on the spot, if I can, please, Jason, and have you share that one with us.
Yeah, and it's good because I made a mistake, so I think it'll be good just for your listeners to, it's always good when people admit they're wrong, but I think there's some good lessons in it, and I've Monday morning quarterbacked this many times after it happened. But long story short, I was at a gas station last year, and the pumps, half of the pumps weren't working. I live in a small town, like I said, so there's only 4 pumps at the gas station, and there was a long line. Just because it's the only gas station around, and I had been waiting about 15 minutes. And during this 15 minutes, I kept seeing people pull up to the opposite side of the pump, realize it's not working, get frustrated, and then either leave or get in line behind me. Well, this gentleman in a truck pulled up, got upset that it wasn't working, and then he looked at the line, and I could tell he was even more upset. Like, I don't want to wait, there was probably 6 or 7 cars behind me in line. And I could see the wheels turning. I'm already sizing him up, and I'm like, okay, I know exactly what this guy's going to do. I see the wheels turning. So sure enough, it's my turn to pull up. And as soon as the car in front of me pulls up, he reaches around. He's on the opposite side. He puts his credit card in, grabs the pump, and reaches around to the opposite side of the pump.
Oh, that's crafty.
Trunk.
That's crafty. I was expecting he tried to pull in front of you, but he won up that. He reached around and grabbed the pump from your side of the style.
Yeah, he gets points for creativity. I'll give him that. That was smart. So now I pull up and reserve my spot, and doing exactly what I've been telling everybody not to do. I roll down my window, and honestly, I had no intention of being a jerk to the guy. I wasn't trying to instigate anything. I just wanted him to know that I knew what he did and I wasn't happy with it. So all I did was roll down the window, and I just very politely, I just said, I was like, sir, I was here first. That's all I said. And he flew off the handle and ran over to my window and started yelling in my window. So now unless I climb over my passenger seat, I have no way to escape because I'm also blocked in because there's cars in front of me and cars behind me. So I can't drive away if this turns into any type of violent encounter. And I'm basically trapped in my driver's side seat. So he just, was telling me all kinds of stuff about me and relationships with my mother and all kinds of, fun stuff that I won't share on the air. And so I just sat there and I just took it. And he's like, if you're really a man, you'll get out of the car right now and you'll show me how much of a man you are. And I'm going to kick your ass.
Right.
And so I just said, I was like, you know what? You're right. You will kick my ass if I get out of the car. Now, I didn't believe that, but this is where the verbal judo and reverse psychology and just being empathetic with people, very difficult to do in a situation. But I do firmly believe that a lot of this is just from my law enforcement background and talking people into handcuffs, like I said, or talking myself out of a butt kicking. I was like, you're right. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Just let him, do his thing and let him vent. Maybe he's actually a nice guy and having a bad day. I don't know. But I'm also sitting there and, I'm carrying a firearm in my waistband, got a backup gun on my ankle. This is going to be an armed encounter if I get in any type of altercation with this guy. And I don't want that. So, that was basically it. And then he drove off, gave me the one finger salute, and then I got my gas and went home. But as soon as I was driving home, I was really upset with myself because I was like, man, I instigated that. And that literally, even though nothing bad happened, that could have turned into a violent encounter where I could have had to shoot that guy, and I would have been justified in shooting him, say it went that far, and assuming, I did everything right. And then I could have gotten into a shooting all because, not because he pumped the gas, because that's his decision. That's his actions that he's in control of. Yeah, he pumped the gas and jumped me in line, but I can't control that. I could have just pulled up, kept my window up, waited for him to finish, and then pumped my gas. But God forbid that got into some type of crazy situation where I did have to use my firearm. I would have had to live with that the rest of my life. Or God forbid, I could have gotten hurt or killed, and then now my wife and daughter don't have, a husband and father, all because I couldn't let some guy costing me 3 to 5 extra minutes go. So I don't know if you guys want to touch on that, but I think it's a good lesson learned. First and foremost, I didn't avoid, and I could have avoided, but then when it did get elevated, I talked my way out of it by basically giving that guy the satisfaction of what he wanted, is to feel in charge and in control and like he was a badass.
Yeah, no, I think, the great thing about encounters like that is that we get to be a student. And I think I can understand and respect the anger towards yourself after the fact. I've done things that, I've regretted and later thought, man, I really shouldn't have done that, whatever it was. And thankfully, I lived past that and was able to take and learn from that. So thank you for sharing that. That's something that, I think that we all can take and listen and really identify with. It's whether it's the line at the gas station or the line at the movie theater or, what have you. There will always be opportunities in our daily walk that we have a decision to make. Do we escalate or do we step away from that and win by not participating? So, that's good. It's really good. Mark,
part of that, is, you're polite about what you said and everything, but like a guy like that, is obviously triggered, right? Like he's obviously on the edge. You could have rolled your eyes and had the same reaction.
Yep.
So a certain amount, I understand what you're saying, but that's something my mother would have said too. You know what I mean? Like that's something, excuse me, sorry, I was here first. That's provoking. I don't know, but I can understand, hindsight.
I guess for me, that was the lesson in it, though, was the fact that we never know what's going to set that other person off. And, Jason, you broke it down very neatly. You said, the choice to cut line and take the fuel pump, away from, your turn and use it himself. That was his choice. He did that. And, he probably didn't think that all the way through either. He didn't think, well, what if this guy confronts me or whatever? He just, assumed that he could do it and get away with it because there's a certain shock value that goes into that. And I think that people like that count on the fact that the other person's not going to react. You also broke it down into the other side of that was that you had the choice to say or do something or say or do nothing. And, Mark's right. You could have rolled your eyes and it could have resulted in the same thing. Frankly, you could have just sat there and not said a thing or even looked at the guy, and he might have come over, and if he was really trying to inflame the situation, he could have, stared at you like, what are you going to do? And tried to provoke himself. You just never know what that other person's going through or what they're capable of or what they're on the edge of. So,
what would have been really kind of classic is if same situation had happened and you were in the work minivan from a few years prior. You approach and you have an MP5 slung around your neck. You know what I mean?
All right. Yeah. I mean, I think that, golly, I just, as a law enforcement officer, I'm sure you had to put up with a lot more stuff than civilians even have to. And that probably perfected or honed at least your response, your physical response, your demeanor, your behavior, your verbal response to somebody that was trying to pick a fight. Because I've seen it. We've all seen it watching the reality shows and things where the suspect is mouthy, extremely mouthy with the police officer. And it doesn't matter that you've got full control of the situation. It doesn't matter that you've got this guy in handcuffs and he's going to jail. He's going to say everything he can about you. And as a civilian, the same thing happens. If we're armed, we have a certain amount of implied control over that situation, or at least a means to escalate it, in a way that might be very bad for that other person. And I would think that we kind of need to adopt that same professional demeanor where we just let it roll off and let them say what they're going to say and try to de-escalate that. I don't know. I almost want to ask questions about, what's the trick to that other than just self-restraint? As a law enforcement officer, do they teach you things? Do you have classes that you go to where it's all about just taking a verbal beating from somebody, and letting them say whatever they want to say to you and not taking the bait? Do they teach you guys that? Or is it just you have that awareness that I have the ability to end this in a very bad way and I'm not going to exercise it. Therefore, that gives me supreme power over the situation.
One of my favorite Friday night things is to watch Live PD. And I watch that and I'm like, it always amazes me. I'm like, how do these guys stay so cool when these people are talking to them like this?
Yeah.
Like it blows my mind because I have a really long fuse. I don't really get mad about much, but like, man, they push and they push and they push and they're good at it, and it's like, it's impressive sometimes to see the restraint. And granted, they all have a camera on them, but
yeah.
No, to answer your question, David, yeah, there literally was courses that we took that were literally called, verbal judo, and you'd get different training. There's a lot of scenario training. The problem is a lot of it just comes with practice and experience. I have dealt with so many mouthy, instigating, antagonistic people. You learn to have thick skin and you learn to just let it roll off. I read a lot. Here's another non-sexy, not cool guy, like, shooting tip or whatever, but I read a lot. There's books on verbal judo. There is a ton of good books on criminal psychology and just the psychology of just in books inside the criminal mind and in different examinations of stuff like that. There's a book, and I don't get paid to say this or anything, but there's a book called Inside the Criminal Mind, and it's by Stanton, I think, Samenow, like Samenow, Stanton Samenow. It's called Inside the Criminal Mind. Great book. Just literally this guy has interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of criminals. And if you're into reading and into that kind of thing, just understanding how these people operate, what makes them tick, and what they value, what they don't value, what's important to them. The more information you gather about somebody, the more you can use that to your advantage. And I don't know if that really answered your question completely, David, but, it's unfortunately for us in the civilian world, and I'm now part of that, there's not like a lot of courses. Like you can't just go, I want to go take verbal judo. That's typically a law enforcement thing. I'm sure there's classes out there that you can take, but it's this sounds silly, but you can practice some of this stuff, on your children, or people, you deal with or whatever. We know how smart our kids are, and we all use reverse psychology, and we all, use different things to, not to manipulate them, but to, get the desired result we want, whether it's a change in our kids' behavior or whatever it is. You can practice different techniques on, just on people like that, particularly your children.
I'll be honest with you. My 4-year-old daughter would win every single time. She knows exactly how to twist me around. And so, but I was thinking about it as you're talking about this. One of the classes that my company offers employees is a class called Crucial Conversations. And there's actually a book on that. There's you can go to Amazon probably and find the thing. But it's a book about having critical conversations or crucial conversations with somebody else who maybe it's in a heated, workplace argument or a heated negotiation for a sale or anything like that. And I think the psychology is kind of the same, that we as people, we revert back to a certain basic animalistic instinct when the stakes are high. And so, it comes through in body language, even in the workplace. Somebody starts leaning into you as they're starting to discuss and things. They don't realize they're doing it. But I've had it happen in hallways. Somebody is very passionate about a thing, and they're petitioning for their side of it, and they start leaning in, and I'm just kind of, hey, hang on, back off just a minute, buddy. You're in my space. And when I say it, the light clicks on in their eyes, like, oh man, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. And we have a laugh about it, right? And the difference between that kind of encounter and the encounter out on the street is that body language is it's the same. They're kind of leaning in and whatever, but the difference is the stakes are higher, and some of the same verbal judo can happen there. Like you were saying, you just start, I guess you kind of acquiesce and you say, hey, look, man, you're right. You could absolutely take me right now. And I respect that and stuff. But does that ever become, do the criminals that are, or the violent actors in these encounters, if you will, not necessarily criminals, but, the violent actors in there, do they look at that as patronizing? Can you say, can you try to de-escalate and that actually pushes them the wrong way? How much is the danger of that in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, that's on a case-by-case basis. I mean, we've all had encounters with people that it does not matter how polite you are, doesn't matter how empathetic you are, it doesn't matter how much you try to see things from their side, they are going to pick a fight no matter what. And unfortunately, there are a lot of criminals like that. But, when you start, and I'm not a psychologist, so I want to be careful with this, but when you start examining, what makes criminals tick, one of the big things that criminals love is they love to be in control. And they want to be in control. They want to be right. They want to win. But they really have that just craving and power struggle for being in control. And so, yeah, you're going to have people that, you can do everything right. Or like, Mark said, I could have just rolled my eyes or whatever, not even talked to that guy, and he still could have picked a fight with me or whatever. But there still are a lot of people, like I talked about, in law enforcement saying, hey, look, yeah, you can kick my butt, but all my buddies are going to come and kick your butt. Like there are people that you can, reason with. But part of that too is if you can reason with someone before it gets elevated, if you can talk to your spouse in a loving, kind, calm manner before the argument turns into World War III, you can often avoid that World War III argument that we've all had. Same thing goes, on the street when you're talking to a criminal or a stranger or whatever. You can, in certain circumstances, a lot of the time, talk your way out of it just by being polite and friendly and professional. But of course, there's going to be people that it does not matter. And one thing that, to relate to us is 2A shooter type people, how often do we instigate with the left? How often do we see somebody, that person wants to, take away all of our guns. So we immediately pick a fight with that person. And I understand this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, but, how often do we sit down with somebody and try to see things from their view, be empathetic with them, and actually try to open up a dialogue? Because look, I was talking to a buddy about this the other day. There's a lot of people that want to take our guns away specifically because they don't want kids to die anymore.
Yeah.
I want to keep my guns because I don't want kids to die anymore. We have a lot of more common ground with some of these people than we think.
Absolutely.
We do. And if we would just take a minute to sit down and be like, let me understand your viewpoint and let me explain my viewpoint, and be a little more empathetic, be a little more patient, and try to actually find some common ground and
less emotional.
Something. And yes, and be less emotional. Absolutely, Mark. We would get a lot farther. And so, while we're talking about de-escalating and, avoiding conflict and stuff, on a broader sense, as far as criminals, I think it is a huge life lesson in all different areas of our life, whether it's family, friends, people with different viewpoints and stuff. And then obviously most importantly, avoiding a confrontation with a criminal, but it has applications in all levels of our life.
No, what a great way to even tie together, really what we've talked about tonight. Again, it seems kind of odd to have a podcast about firearms and being the armed citizen, and then talk about how not to use it. But this is a skill that we can take with us and use in almost every area of our lives, unlike a firearm, right? The firearm has a very narrow corridor of use, but de-escalation and understanding the other person's perspective and understanding motives and choosing when to have the fight and when not to, and when to back away from a confrontation, that's something that we can use with our family. Like you said, Jason, it's something that we can use, I think even in our workplace. I'll be honest, you could probably use this skill even at church, and I'm trying to think of the most safe, non-threatening environment possible. But, even there, you're not going to encounter people that believe every single thing that you believe, and there's going to be contention and differences of opinion and stuff. And so we just have to learn to take the passion and the emotion out of it. Or at the very least, we need to try to understand where that passion and emotion is coming from and what's triggering it. And that may be a lot to do in a violent encounter. And I'm not suggesting that, if you're at the gas station and you're pumping your gas and somebody comes up with a knife and sticks it in your side and says, give me your wallet or I'm gonna cut you open. That's not necessarily the moment to sit down and try to understand that man's pain and his dilemma in life. There's a different response there for something like that, right? Because he's already escalated. But, the guy that's standing across from you at the pump that's glaring at you and just seems angry and agitated and just generally pissed off at the world, maybe pick up on that and understand his passion is at a higher level than yours. And now's the time just to keep your mouth shut and let water roll off your back.
Totally. And, something we haven't really touched on is that, it's not just angry people or triggered people, but chemically enhanced people, whether it's drugs or alcohol. And that makes a whole different dynamic because they're 100% unpredictable.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They almost sometimes don't act human. You know what I mean? Like that is not how a human is supposed to act, and it's a totally new dynamic that's absolutely a challenge to deal with. And trying to de-escalate that is just, cracking your head against the wall. But one question I did have for you, Jason, do you recommend or know of any trainers outside of the LE community that do focus on like the de-escalation of verbal judo? I mean, I know of a couple. I just didn't know if you knew of any that you'd want to share with listeners off the top of your head.
I don't have any that I've taken outside of law enforcement, so I'm always hesitant to recommend something that I haven't actually physically been a part of or whatever. But if you have some, absolutely go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't taken class with either of these two guys, but they both. I've listened to a lot of their podcasts, and as far as industry, they're somewhat renowned, and that's William April from April Risk Consulting. He is a actual licensed mental health professional with a background as a sheriff's office and the U.S. Marshal. So he definitely has some really great insight. But another one is Craig Douglas. He does a lot with you're walking down the street and the bad guy approaches you and he's helping you through distance, talking about angles, talking about movements, talking about, different things to say to de-escalate, to kind of get in their OODA loop a little bit. And,
right.
And those are just a couple that I know really focus on that part of the mental side of the training, like a lot more than just going to the gun and standing on the line and firing your 1,000 rounds this weekend. And I really dig that stuff. And I think that it's like I said, it's kind of like the medical thing. Like it's not sexy, so people aren't all about it. And I think for me, I think it's neater. Like, believe me, I love shooting my gun all the time, but, man, hearing how getting into the mental side of it, I think is really awesome.
Yeah, I would say this, Mark. As armed citizens, we've embarked on a lifestyle change in a lot of areas, whether it's adjusting how we dress or where we go or who we hang out with or how attentive we are to the things going on around us. But also, I think we've committed or should have committed to become a perpetual student and learn these different facets of handling problems. Ian talked about being the multidisciplinary tactician. Jason, when you and I spoke privately the other day, you used the term become the multi-tool. Become a master of all, or a jack of all trades, a master of none, rather. And I think that this is one aspect of that. So we absolutely should invest our time and our energy and our money into the non-sexy side of being an armed, prepared citizen. And, it's going to be medical. It's going to be verbal judo. It's going to be a lot of things, and shooting is just one of them. Jason, I'm looking at the clock, and I know we're kind of running short on time. Do you have a moment for us to ask you a question that came from one of our listeners?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So I think this is going to really draw on your background as a law enforcement officer, especially in doing these high risk raids and things. I'm going to make an assumption that you've probably done some building clearing and room clearing and things like that. So you're used to going into an environment where there is a possible armed aggressor waiting for you. So just to kind of give you a cliff notes of this question. Came from one of our listeners, a guy named David in Spring Hill, Tennessee. We talked about this last week, where he said, he works in a rather large, business setting, industrial setting. Firearms are not allowed inside the building, but he is able to keep one in his car. If an active shooter situation were to break out inside of that building, and he was able to extract himself from it quickly and get out to his vehicle, should he then retrieve his firearm and go back inside and try to save the lives of his coworkers? Yourself as a veteran law enforcement officer, what would your answer be to somebody who is facing that decision? Should I go back in there and try to do some good and save my coworkers, or should I stay outside? What would you tell them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I listened to that episode. So yeah, I heard that gentleman's question. Generally speaking, no. I can really only think of a couple of reasons I would say yes. And the only time I would say yes probably would be, if you live in Wyoming and you work somewhere, in a small town and law enforcement is 20 minutes away or something like that, I can see, okay, I got to run out to my car, grab my gun or something like that. Most people know that law enforcement training completely changed in the early 2000s after Columbine, which was 99, I believe. I could be wrong on that, but I think Columbine happened in 1999. Patrol cops used to stage. They don't stage anymore. Well, unless you work for Broward, but that's a whole other topic that I won't get into. Sorry, I probably shouldn't have said that, but that's a whole
you said what you said what we're all thinking. Yeah. So,
no, but generally speaking, so I went to the police academy in 2003, 2004. I can't remember 2004, and I got hired in 2006. Before I even hit the streets, we had a lot of active shooter training as just regular trainees in the police academy. And then even before you hit your field training and law enforcement, part of our in-service training was active shooter training. There is no way for me, the responding cop, to know who you are. I am responding to an active shooter threat, and I know that somebody is inside your business or the mall or whatever shooting people. And if I walk in and see you with a gun, there's a good chance you're going to get dropped. Unfortunately, yes, in a perfect world, is there going to be a warning? Is there going to be, hey, drop the gun or whatever? Yeah. But especially in a school or work setting, cops get the call, hey, somebody's inside shooting. They're going to go in, and generally speaking, they're going to engage the threat. The only other circumstance I could, maybe possibly justify, and this is just the world according to Jason, I'm not recommending this to anybody, but personally, if I was, maybe pulling up to the mall or a school or something where my wife or daughter was, and all of a sudden an active shooter incident, broke out, and I was outside, I might, not saying I would, I might go inside because, okay, I've got a wife or daughter or somebody in there to rescue, but that's not even me being inside and exiting and coming back in. So that's kind of a whole nother situation. But for the most part, generally speaking, I would say no, do not go out to your vehicle and retrieve your firearm and go back in. At that point, your best bet is to be a good witness, be the line of sight and line of communication for law enforcement, get as much info as you can out to them, and be a witness. That's the best advice I can give to your listener for that question.
Perfect. No, thank you. That kind of lines up with what Mark and I were thinking last week as we were working through that ourselves. So I appreciate that. David and Sprinkle, I hope that helps you some. So, gentlemen, I hate to say it, but we are seriously up against probably the end of the episode. I could spend all night talking with you, Jason, and I hope that we could ask you to come back on again and continue talking about this or perhaps talk about something different.
Come back on. I didn't know what you were going to do. I was done rambling. So if you're asking me to come back.
Yeah. No, we'd love to have you back. Absolutely. We appreciate your time tonight. And I learned something from this, and I can't imagine that others didn't as well. And I just want to pause for one moment and just say thank you to you and your law enforcement brothers and sisters, who are the consummate professionals and who are having the patience and tolerating mouthy citizens and not going to guns as the first tool in your toolkit when you encounter us out there, especially if it's a bad situation. So you guys don't get the thanks and the attention that's deserved often, for that kind of thing. So I really do appreciate it. You guys do a thankless job.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Also, I'm looking forward to finally crossing paths with Jason after doing work with him for about 4 years next month in Dallas.
Okay, so you're both going to the NRA show. Man, you're killing me. I'm really thinking about trying to make it my way down there. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well, Mark. We've interacted for all these years now. It'll be nice to actually finally meet in person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jason, are you going to be going down there to represent your other business?
Yes, that's kind of the main reason. It's going to be more of a business trip for me than pleasure, but I'm sure it'll still be fun.
Okay. Well, why don't we wrap things up with that then? Again, I just want to express my sincere thanks for you coming onto the show tonight and talking to us about how to avoid using your firearm, and really helping drive in that point that not every problem is a gun problem. So where could folks connect with you after the show if they wanted to learn more about Jason Demo and what you do now as a civilian?
Sure. So probably the easiest way, if it's a non-professional thing, Instagram, I'm just at Jason Demo. for quite a while on there. My page has been very much dedicated to just trying to encourage people to get good training, get good gear, be well-rounded, be that multi-tool, get the non-sexy stuff, get medical training and medical gear, get the verbal judo, get in shape, do all that stuff on top of, your shooting and firearms and combatives and things like that. But people message me all day, every day, asking me questions. I'm happy to answer any questions people send my way or point them in the right direction if it's something that I can't answer. My company, like you said earlier, is www.jason-demo.com. That's my professional website. I specialize in photography and media consulting specifically for the firearms industry, training, tactics, K9, all that fun stuff. So do social media management, content creation, stuff like that.
That's fantastic. So on your Instagram, do you post some of the photos of firearms and gear and things like that you've taken?
Yes. Yeah, that's pretty much most of what it is now. Is a lot of the companies I'm working with, different products and gear and guns and stuff.
Okay.
So if you're into all that cool guy stuff, there's lots of cool pictures on there.
I'll be very honest. I love to scroll through Instagram and look at things that I probably shouldn't spend money on. So it's.
And let it be known that Jason has one of the sexiest looking high-speed Glocks on the gram.
Is that right?
It's. For those of you who don't know me, it's one of the ugliest Glocks on Instagram. But I'm working with a Cerakote and gun modification company now, so it's finally going to look professional, which I think actually is going to upset a lot of people that it's not just my rattle can home camo job. But yeah, that's funny, Mark.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right. Jason, thank you, sir. I hope that everybody does go and head over there. Again, that's you can find Jason on Instagram as at JasonDemo, DEMO, and also you can check out his website at www.jason-demo.com. I will put these things in the show notes so that everybody can link to them easily as they're flipping to the podcast. So you guys listening on iTunes and such can check it out there, and we'll make sure that we've got that provided for you. And we'll also do some show notes with the various books and things that we've mentioned tonight. Also want to thank Mark Lancaster for co-hosting again. Mark, I think it probably goes without saying, but where can people connect with you after the show if they wanted to?
squaredawaycustoms.com for the website, and you can always email info@squaredawaycustoms.com as well.
Perfect.
As well as Instagram, Facebook, all of them.
Yep. Lots of good holster porn on Instagram from Squared Away Customs. So yeah, there you go.
Don't forget the Shooters Nation coupon code on the website too.
Absolutely. We'll throw that in the show notes as well. People need to take advantage of that. So as a reminder to everybody, we've got a mailing list now. You can head over to shootersnation.com and add yourself to it. We'll be putting special promotions out for our subscribers and advance notice of future episode topics so you can get questions into us for the guests. Also, Shooters Nation swag is now available. We've got a pretty darn cool logo, if I don't say so myself, and you can put that thing on your body with a ball cap or a polo shirt. Also, finally, we're now on Patreon. And I mention that simply because if you want to support the show, you can visit patreon.com/shootersnation and contribute as little as $5 a month to help us keep the thing going. That money goes towards our monthly expenses. So any contributions are very much appreciated. They're not required, but your generosity does go a long way to helping us. And we're working on exclusive perks for our patrons as well. So there you go. But anyway, all right. Well, I guess that's it then. It's a wrap. Thank you once again for listening, and we hope that we'll catch you again next time. And until then, please be safe out there.
The preceding segment was a production of the Shooters Nation podcast. Visit us online at shootersnation.com.